A 17-year-old German kid who spoke almost no English learned UFO's entire set in a venue bathroom in one afternoon and walked out and played it perfectly. That moment transformed a forgotten space rock band into one of the most dangerous acts in hard rock history. And in 1978, they stood on the edge of conquering America. Then one argument in a New York studio erased everything. This is UFO, the greatest rock empire that never was. It was late 1978. Inside the record plant in New York City, UFO were mixing what should have been their crowning achievement. The tapes contained some of the most electrifying live rock music ever committed to vinyl, scorching versions of Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom that proved this band could stand in any arena on the planet and win. The records were selling. The tours were drawing bigger crowds. American audiences who had once treated them as a curiosity were now showing up in huge numbers. After 5 years of grinding through clubs and opening slots, UFO had finally broken through in the American market. The dream was real, and it was right there. And Michael Schenker, the young German guitarist at the center of all of it, was barely holding together. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. He was 23 years old. He was brilliant. He was unstable. And at the precise moment this band stood on the doorstep of something enormous, he looked around that studio, muttered something under his breath about the song they were arguing over, and walked out. What happened next didn't just change the band. It erased a future that was already within reach. To understand what was lost in that New York recording studio, you had to understand where UFO came from. They started in London in 1968, and in those early years, they were about as fashionable as a three-piece suit at Woodstock. Their original sound was rooted in space rock, psychedelic, atmospheric, drifting. It found a cult following in Germany and Japan, but barely registered at home in the UK. By the early 1970s, the original lineup of Phil Mogg on vocals, Pete Way on bass, and Andy Parker on drums recognized that their sound had run out of road. They needed something harder, something with teeth. A series of lineup changes produced nothing promising. The identity of the band remained vague, unfocused, unremarkable. Then, in the summer of 1973, something happened that nobody planned. UFO was touring Germany when a local act called the Scorpions opened for them. The Scorpions featured two brothers, Rudolf Schenker and his 17-year-old sibling Michael. When UFO suddenly found themselves short a guitarist for a show, someone had the idea of asking the teenage Schenker to fill in. There was a problem. The kid spoke almost no English. Bass player Pete Way pulled him into a venue bathroom and showed him the band's riffs, chord by chord, for an hour-long set. Michael Schenker listened, watched, nodded. Then he walked out and played the whole thing like he had written it himself. The band stood there and watched their future materialize in front of them.
Doctor, doctor, please.
Schenker officially joined UFO in July of 1973. He relocated to London, brought with him a white Gibson Flying V that would become one of rock's most recognizable guitars, and immediately began transforming the band's sound from the inside out. His playing was unlike anything working in hard rock at the time. It combined the emotional directness of the blues with a speed and precision that suggested something from another era altogether. The unremarkable space rock band from London had found its identity, and they had found it in a 17-year-old German kid who barely knew their names, standing in a bathroom in Germany, learning their songs by watching someone else play them. Once Schenker arrived, UFO moved fast. They signed a record deal which gave them the promotional infrastructure and financial stability to compete at the highest level. And between 1974 and 1977, they released a sequence of albums that built their reputation like layers of forged steel. Phenomenon arrived in 1974 and introduced the world to the Schenker-era sound. Dr. Doctor and Rock Bottom were the calling cards, songs built around melodic riffs that stuck like splinters and solos that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than technical ability alone. Force It followed in 1975, harder and more aggressive, pushing the band toward a rawer identity. No Heavy Petting, in 1976, broadened the sonic palette. And by the time Lights Out arrived in 1977, the band's sound had become even more layered and ambitious. Lights Out produced by Ron Nevison, featured orchestral touches, complex arrangements, and a 7-minute centerpiece called Love to Love that proved UFO could hold a room in absolute silence and then detonate it. The record was a commercial breakthrough. Suddenly, the band was no longer just a cult favorite on the American circuit. They were headlining bigger rooms and climbing toward real arena status. For the audience that discovered them through FM radio in those years, UFO occupied a very particular frequency. They were grittier than the theatrical arena bands that dominated the era. Phil Mogg sang with streetwise bluntness, not operatic excess. Pete Way owned the stage like he was born on it. And Schenker played with a fluidity that made even the fastest passages sound inevitable rather than forced.
Lights out in London.
By the late 1970s, UFO sounded like a band that could take on anyone. They had the songs, they had the live show, and they had one of the most distinctive guitarists in rock history playing every night. The American crowds were getting larger with each successive tour. The album sales were climbing. The momentum that had been building for 5 years had finally reached the tipping point. They were not just getting better, they were becoming dangerous. But there was always the question of Michael Schenker. He was brilliant in a way that made everything around him seem slightly brighter. And he was fragile in a way that made everyone around him hold their breath. He was an introverted young German, surrounded by boisterous, hard-drinking Londoners who communicated through banter, sarcasm, and what Phil Mogg and Pete Way called affectionate teasing. What they thought of as humor, Schenker experienced as isolation. The language barrier that had been charming in 1973 became a wall by 1976. When Schenker was frustrated, when he felt creatively sidelined or disrespected, he had no reliable way to express it. He would go quiet, he would retreat, and when the retreating wasn't enough, he would simply leave. One of the early departures came in 1977, after the success of Lights Out, when the expectations of the music industry bore down on the band with crushing new weight. Schenker, by his own admission, backed away from the pressure. He was frightened by what was being asked of him, and uncertain whether he could sustain it indefinitely without breaking. Stories began circulating that he had joined a religious cult called the Moonies. The band half confirmed, half denied these rumors, with a mischief that only deepened the legend. The press called him Mad Mickey. The audiences loved the mythology. But for Pete Way and Phil Mogg, managing this situation from the inside was exhausting. Because here was the cruel irony. Every time Schenker left, UFO nearly collapsed. And every time he came back, they nearly conquered the world. This was not a clean break. This was a band hanging on by inches, perpetually suspended between catastrophe and greatness. By 1978, the band had coaxed him back one more time. He was with them for the recording of Obsession, which pushed their American presence to a new high. He was with them for the tour that yielded the live recordings. He was still there, night after night. And for a brief window in that year, it genuinely looked like he might stay. It looked like the worst was behind them. It looked like they had made it through the hardest part. They had not. The recordings that became Strangers in the Night were captured during the autumn 1978 tour across the American Midwest, primarily at shows in Chicago, Louisville, and several surrounding dates. The live album became their defining document, a double record that captured UFO at their absolute musical peak, playing with a focus and electricity that very few bands ever managed to preserve on tape. Dr. Doctor blazed through the speakers like it had just been written that morning. Rock Bottom stretched into a slow, patient exploration of everything Schenker could do with a melody, building for long minutes before it released the tension in a cascade of notes that left audiences stunned. The rhythm section locked in with a weight and precision that anchored everything above it. Phil Mogg commanded the front of the stage with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what stood behind him. It was magnificent. And backstage, the situation was disintegrating. Schenker was missing shows. His behavior had grown erratic. He felt increasingly boxed out of the songwriting process, outmaneuvered by Mogg and Way, and the frustration that he could never fully articulate was boiling into something that couldn't be managed anymore. The road had worn him down to something raw and exposed. Confrontation arrived during the mixing sessions at the record plant in New York. A disagreement erupted over a specific version of Rock Bottom on the live tapes. Schenker wanted a different take used. Producer Ron Nevison refused to budge. He was not replacing anything on a live record. That was the end of the conversation, as far as Nevison was concerned. Schenker stood there for a moment, then he said something quietly about the song, Poor, Poor Rock Bottom, and walked out of the studio. His last official performance had already taken place at the Keystone Palo Alto on October 29, 1978. He was 23 years old. By the time Strangers in the Night was released in January 1979, the album cover already included a credit thanking Paul Chapman, Schenker's replacement. The classic era was over before the public had even finished celebrating its greatest achievement. This wasn't just another breakdown. This was the moment Michael Schenker almost stayed and didn't. And the distance between those two outcomes turned out to be everything. It was worth asking what might have followed had Schenker walked back through that studio door instead of out of it. UFO, in 1978, possessed something rare and difficult to manufacture. They had the live show, they had the catalog, they had the momentum of an American audience that was finally paying full attention. And they had a guitarist whose playing bridged two eras in a way that almost no one else managed. The bluesy emotional weight of the 1970s combined with the high-velocity precision that would define the 1980s. A follow-up studio album built on the foundation of what Lights Out had established, with the classic lineup intact, could have positioned them squarely in the conversation alongside Van Halen and Aerosmith. The songs were already there. Only You Can Rock Me had shown they could write radio-friendly anthems without sacrificing their edge. A Ron Nevison production with that classic lineup in 1979 or 1980 had the potential to be enormous.
Only you can rock me, rock me.
The early 1980s belonged to the guitar hero. Eddie Van Halen was rewriting the rules of what was possible. Fans across America were hungry for instrumental virtuosity paired with hard rock melody. Schenker was already that player in 1978, technically ferocious, melodically gifted, instantly recognizable. Had he remained stable and committed, he could have stood alongside Van Halen as one of the defining guitar voices of that entire decade, a peer, not just an influence. And UFO's influence on what actually followed was already undeniable. Bands like Iron Maiden drew clear inspiration from what UFO had done. Guitarists like Kirk Hammett have cited Schenker among the players who helped push them toward the instrument in the first place. These were not casual admirers. These were musicians who saw something in UFO that shaped the next generation of heavy music. In the timeline that never happened, UFO did not merely influence that generation, they led it. They became the bridge between the raw authenticity of the late 1970s and the polished dominance of the early 1980s. They filled stadiums rather than arenas. They were household names rather than revered cult favorites. Instead, they were stopped, right at the edge of something bigger. Paul Chapman stepped in as Schenker's replacement, and he was, by any measure, a capable guitarist. He had a style rooted in the melodic tradition, technically solid, respectful of the existing songs. But he was not Michael Schenker. The white flying V was gone. The particular chemistry that had made UFO feel dangerous was gone with it. The band pressed forward because they had no other option. Their next significant move was extraordinary on paper. For their 1980 album, No Place to Run, they enlisted Sir George Martin, the legendary producer behind nearly every Beatles album. The man known as the Fifth Beatle was now working with a British hard rock band. On paper, it was a massive statement of the band's stature. In practice, it was a mismatch that revealed how far the band had drifted from what had made them essential. Martin brought sophistication and orchestral thinking to the recordings, careful arrangements, and a smoothness that subdued the harder edges of the band's sound. The guitars sat lower in the mix. The grit that had made Rock Bottom and Lights Out feel physical and immediate was polished down to something more controlled and clean. For the fans who had fallen in love with the sweat and danger of the Schenker years, it felt like someone had put a suit and tie on their favorite bar band and told them to stand still. No Place to Run peaked at number 11 in the UK, just outside the top 10. It did not match the momentum of its predecessors, and the band that had been on the verge of breaking through across America instead settled into a lower gear. The fragmentation continued through the early 1980s. More lineup changes followed. More records arrived that contained real moments of quality without ever recapturing the electricity of those late 1970s peaks. The dangerous energy of the Schenker years did not return. They didn't collapse overnight. They just never got there. The window that had been open in 1978 closed quietly, and the world moved on without fully registering what it had missed. UFO did not fail. That was the important thing to understand about their story. They built a catalog that still stands among the finest in hard rock. Strangers in the Night remained one of the greatest live albums ever pressed to vinyl. Dr. Doctor became Iron Maiden's walk-on music for decades, the song that greeted 60,000 people before every concert, a tribute from one generation to the band that helped make the next generation possible. Michael Schenker, for his part, went on to form the Michael Schenker Group and carved out a significant solo career on his own terms. But the household name recognition that had seemed inevitable in 1978 never fully arrived for either the group or the man. What UFO represented for the American rock fan who caught them in those arenas in the late 1970s was something specific and irreplaceable. They were the band you discovered before everyone else did. They were the act on FM radio at 11 at night that made you reach over and turn the volume up and wonder why they weren't the biggest band on the planet. They were a best-kept secret that deserved to be a universal one. For a brief moment in 1978, it looked like that was about to change. The records were selling, the American audiences were growing, the live album was extraordinary, and Michael Schenker was there every night, playing like the future of rock and roll depended on the outcome. Maybe it did. Maybe the only thing standing between UFO and everything was one argument in a recording studio in New York City. That is the timeline that never happened. UFO proved that greatness and timing are not always the same thing. They had the talent, the sound, and the moment. And the moment slipped away in a New York studio in 1978. But the music refused to be forgotten. If you caught them on FM radio back then, you already knew what they were. Drop your UFO memory in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's golden era.